The first thing I had to understand was that Betaflight is the software that runs on the flight controller, which is the drone's brain. Betaflight Configurator is a program that runs on your computer and connects to the flight controller to customize the way Betaflight controls the drone. In Betaflight Configurator, there is a tab called Modes, where you can tell Betaflight to change its behavior based on certain signals from your radio control transmitter. So the next question is, what modes are available for us to control? And which ones do we actually want to use? I went to the Modes tab and made a list of every available flight mode. Then I crossed out the ones I knew I did not want. I was left with a list of 8 nodes. I added acro to this list because that's the default stabilization mode. One thing to notice about this list is that these modes are not all the same kind of thing. Angle, air, and acro are flight stabilization modes and mutually exclusive. Launch control is a modification of acro mode, but not a distinct flight mode. Pre-arm is not a flight mode at all, but an extra safeguard to prevent motors from turning unintentionally. Arm is also not a flight mode, but rather an on-off switch for the motors. It is guarded by pre-arm, and it can be applied in any of the proper flight modes, as well as turtle mode, or flip over after crash mode, as Betaflight calls it, which is too long for a name, but it is impressively short and to the point as a description of what it does. That leaves us with pit mode and the beeper. Pit mode allows us to reduce power to the video transmitter or turn it off entirely. Beeper makes the motors beep so that we can find our drone when it falls and it can't get up. These two aren't necessarily exclusive of each other or the flight modes, but there's no point in beeping while we're in flight, and we definitely don't want to turn off video while we're flying. That picture helped, but it got messy toward the end, so I reorganized the modes into categories or groups. In the flight group are acro, air, and angle modes. Each of these modes can be armed, and arming requires pre-arming. In the crash group are the flip over after crash, or turtle mode, and the beeper. Turtle mode needs to be armed just like the flight modes. The last group I call ground or safe, and it contains pit mode, which is turned on using the arm switch, but doesn't need to be pre-armed. The default state on power up will be in this ground or safe group with pit mode off and arming disabled. I think this drawing gives us a clearer picture of the various states we want to select and how they relate to each other. I think it also suggests a way to use the switches on our transmitter to select modes during a normal flight. The most obvious thing is to use a 2-position switch for arming. I think it also makes sense to use the same switch for turning pit mode on and off. Pre-arm makes most sense with a momentary switch and probably needs to be sent on a different channel. Since there are 3 mode groups, it makes sense that we would use a 3-position switch to select the group that we want to use for the phase of flight we're in. Since there are 2 modes within the crash group, I will use another 2-position switch to choose between turtle mode and the beeper. I'll also use another 3-position switch to select between the 3 flight modes. That's a total of 4 switches, 2 2-position and 2 3-position switches. My radio has 1 3-position and 2 2-position switches on each side, so my scheme has at least a chance of working with my Spektrum DX6. For me, it's most intuitive to push the arm switch away from me for arm and pull for disarm. The group switch will be in the position I think of as full pull or fully toward me when it's in the safe group or the ground group. When the group switch is in the middle position, that will be the flight group, and pushing the switch full up or away from me will select the crash group. The 3-position flight mode selector will be in air mode when it's in the middle. Pulled toward me will be acro, and pushed away from me will be angle mode. The 2-position crash mode selector will be pull toward me for throttle mode, and push away for beeper. I'm not a user interface designer, but this setup is the most intuitive one I've found so far for me. In order to actually configure the transmitter and Betaflight, I want to draw this map yet again, this time as a list of all the states I actually want to pick from. I'm going to start with the beeper mode first. I'm not making separate on and off states for this. If I pick beeper, it's going to be on. If I don't want beeper, I'll be in some other state. The 2 other states in the crash group are the turtle mode, armed, and disarmed. Each of the stabilization modes can be either armed or disarmed, so there are 6 states in the flight group. The ground group consists of 2 states, pit mode and another mode that doesn't have a name, but I'll call it safe, since the motors cannot be armed, even though the drone is powered up. That is a total of 11 states. Now we can start thinking of how to communicate what we want to the drone. Betaflight interprets radio control commands as whole numbers and expects them to be roughly in the range of 1,000 to 2,000. 11 numbers evenly spaced on a line from 1,000 to 2,000 works nicely because each number will be around 100. I'll assign each of these numbers to one of our unique control states. It's nice that it works out this neatly, but it doesn't have to. In fact, we'll demonstrate that next by programming the transmitter. I discussed in a different video how I had to change the endpoints in my DX6 to output numbers in the range that Betaflight expects. It's easy enough, but unfortunately the DX6 doesn't speak in the same terms as Betaflight. DX6 endpoints are programmed in terms of percent rather than the raw numbers that Betaflight uses. So instead of 1,000 to 2,000, the DX6 says it's outputting the range negative 147 to positive 147. So the full range in the DX6 is 294 numbers wide. To distribute our 11 numbers evenly across this range, divide 294 into 10 equal parts, putting our numbers about 29.4 units apart. We can only program whole numbers, so there will be a little bit of fudging that we'll have to do. To figure this out, I'm going to write out the list of Betaflight numbers again, and then I'll write the spectrum numbers next to each of the Betaflight numbers. Each of the spectrum numbers will be 29 or 30 units apart, and hopefully everything will make sense and match up. It's easy enough to start at the ends, so I'll put 147 and negative 147 by 2,000 and 1,000, respectively. Then I'll subtract 29 or 30 from the top number and mirror that number on the bottom side and hopefully meet at 0 in the middle. It works out nicely here, but the truth is I spun my wheels for a long time when I was trying to figure this out. Anyway, now I'll go back to the list of states that I had before and add the list of spectrum values in and start matching everything up with switch positions. Recall now that my plan was to use a 3-position switch to jump between mode groups. My idea here is that I'll only want to move that switch when the drone is on the ground, whether it's crashed or not, motors disarmed, and the video transmitter on. So the group switch should jump by default between states where those things are true. Another part of my idea is that the group switch is the basic input for the aux1 channel in Betaflight, and that the other switches will modify its output. This means that with those switches in their default or neutral positions, the group switch will jump between its 3 default values. Given all that, and looking at the list of states, I think these 3 are the targets for the default positions of the group switch: 88, negative 29, and negative 147. We'll have to remember these for later when we program the radio. In fact, that's the point of all these drawings and lists, collecting the numbers that we'll need to program into the transmitter and to Betaflight. Now notice that the jump between the disarmed state of two different flight modes is 200 in Betaflight terms, or 59 in Spectrum. That suggests that the mode switches will need to modify the output of aux1 by 59 Spectrum units. Speaking of jumping between modes in a group, in the crash group we're picking between two modes. For the flight group it's 3. For the ground group there are no modes to pick from. I'm going to use a 3-position switch while we're in flight group and a 2-position switch while we're in the crash group. In safe I'll ignore both of those switches. We've looked at the big jumps between groups and the smaller jumps between modes. And now the last jump to look at is the one between armed and disarmed, or on and off. In all those cases, between armed and disarmed and on and off, the jump is 100 in Betaflight or 29 in Spectrum. So that's how much the 2-position arm-disarm switch will have to modify the aux1 output. Now that we've calculated all the numbers we need to know, it's time to program the transmitter.